I had always dreamed of flying. The thought of soaring through the skies far above the earth with nothing but the clouds around me gave me a sense of freedom and peace that nothing else could. And for years that dream became my reality. I became a commercial pilot, responsible for ferrying hundreds of passengers from one side of the world to the other. My life was full of routine flights, breathtaking views, and the quiet hum of the engines lulling me into a state of control and security. But there are moments in life that tear through that sense of control, shattering everything you believe to be real, everything you rely on for safety. What happened on that flight still haunts me. It ended my career. It ended my life as I knew it. It was a regular flight, one of many I had done before, a standard route from New York to London. A night flight with a full load of passengers, but the weather was clear and the winds were calm. There was nothing to suggest that this flight would be any different from the hundreds before it. I was in the cockpit with my co-pilot, Martin. He was a reliable partner, someone I'd flown with countless times. We had a good rapport, understanding each other's habits and routines. Everything was running smoothly. We had reached cruising altitude and the plane was on autopilot, gliding through the night sky. The moon cast a soft glow on the clouds beneath us, making it look like we were flying over an endless ocean of silver. I remember leaning back in my seat, taking a deep breath and letting the calm wash over me. There's something about flying at night that feels almost meditative, just you, the darkness, and the distant stars. Martin and I chatted idly, mostly small talk about the flight, our schedules, and the mundane things we both needed to catch up on. But even as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started subtly, a faint feeling of unease that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I glanced at the instruments. Everything was normal. Fuel levels were fine. Engines were purring like they should, and there was no sign of turbulence or bad weather ahead. Yet the feeling gnawed at me. I chalked it up to exhaustion. After all, I had been flying back to back for the past few weeks, and maybe fatigue was catching up with me. But then it happened. At first, it was a flicker on the radar screen, a blip here and gone in the blink of an eye. I frowned and leaned forward, staring at the monitor. "Did you see that?" I asked Martin. "See what?" he replied, glancing over. The screen flickered for a second. He squinted at the radar, then shrugged. "Probably just a glitch. These systems act up sometimes." I nodded, but something inside me wasn't satisfied. Glitches happened, sure, but something about this felt different. I kept my eyes on the radar, waiting to see if it would happen again. Several minutes passed, and I began to relax, thinking it really was just a momentary malfunction. But then, out of nowhere, the radar lit up like a Christmas tree. Blips and signals appeared all around us, multiple contacts moving erratically, too fast and too close. My heart skipped a beat. "What the hell is that?" I muttered under my breath. Martin leaned in, his face suddenly tense. "Are those planes? There's no way. They'd have warned us." I quickly switched to the traffic control frequency, checking for any nearby aircraft or anomalies. Nothing. We were alone up here, where at least we were supposed to be. But the radar was telling a different story. Something was out there, something moving fast and converging on us. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Suddenly, the plane jolted violently. The cockpit rattled and alarms began to blare. "Turbulence," Martin shouted over the noise. "No," I replied, gripping the controls. "We weren't expecting anything like this." The plane bucked again, harder this time. The overhead bins creaked and groaned, and I could hear the panicked murmurs of passengers from the cabin. My hands flew over the controls, disengaging the autopilot as I tried to steady the aircraft. But something was wrong. The plane wasn't responding the way it should. The controls felt heavy, sluggish, like we were fighting against something unseen. The blips on the radar began to disappear one by one, as quickly as they had appeared. But just as I thought we might regain control, the temperature in the cockpit dropped, plummeting so fast that my breath came out in visible clouds. The instruments began to malfunction, flickering erratically. The altimeter spun wildly. The compass began spinning in circles, and the artificial horizon blinked in and out. "What the hell is going on?" Martin yelled, his voice tight with fear. I didn't have an answer. I could barely think, my mind racing as I fought to keep the plane stable. But then I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a shadow outside the window. My first instinct was that it was a trick of the light, Or maybe just my imagination running wild under the stress, but it wasn't. Something was out there. It was dark, darker than the night sky itself, like a void hanging in the air, moving alongside the plane. It was massive, larger than anything I'd ever seen in the air. There were no lights, no shape I could define, just an overwhelming sense of something being there, something unnatural. Martin saw it too. His face went pale, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What? What is that?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I was seeing. The shadow, or whatever it was, began to move closer, inching toward the plane like it was sizing us up. The lights inside the cockpit flickered, and I could feel the air growing impossibly heavy, like the atmosphere itself was thickening around us. Suddenly, the plane tilted violently to the side. I fought to right it, but the controls weren't responding. Alarms screamed in my ears, but all I could focus on was the darkness outside, the way it seemed to reach out, enveloping the plane in its inky blackness. Then came the sound, a low, guttural moan, like metal being twisted and torn apart, but deeper, more resonant. It vibrated through the entire plane, shaking us to the core. I looked at Martin, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with terror. "Get us out of here!" he screamed. I yanked on the controls, desperately trying to pull the plane out of the nosedive we had fallen into, but it was no use. The shadow, the darkness, whatever it was pulling us in. The plane shook violently, and for a brief moment I thought we were going to crash. My life flashed before my eyes, the years of training, the countless flights, my family, everything I had ever known, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The shadow vanished. The controls became responsive again. The alarms silenced, and the plane leveled out. I sat there breathing heavily, my hands trembling on the yoke. Martin stared at me, his face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What the hell just happened?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that something had been out there, something that defied everything I understood about flying, about reality. I took a shaky breath and checked the instruments. Everything was normal again, altitude, speed, everything. It was as if nothing had happened, but we both knew that wasn't true. We landed in London without incident, but the silence between us was heavy. Neither of us spoke a word as we taxied to the gate, and when the passengers disembarked, I could see the unease in their eyes. They didn't know what had happened, but they had felt it too, the wrongness in the air, the sense of something unnatural pressing down on them. After the flight, Martin and I went our separate ways, but the experience never left us. I couldn't shake the feeling of that shadow, that presence outside the plane. It haunted my dreams, waking me in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it, the darkness, the void, reaching out for me. I tried to fly again. I tried to go back to my routine, but every time I stepped into the cockpit, the memories came flooding back. The fear, the helplessness, the sense of being at the mercy of something far beyond my understanding. Eventually, I couldn't do it anymore. I resigned. I left the life I had always dreamed of behind, but the shadow still follows me. Even now, when I look up at the night sky, I feel it watching, waiting, and I know one day it'll come for me again.